On this episode of the Photography News podcast, Will reveals his photographic paranoia, Kingsley explains why he loves bad weather, and Roger has his head in the clouds. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Photography News podcast. My name is Roger Payne and I'm the editorial director at Photography News. And in light of recent events in North London, I thought I'd introduce my two colleagues on the podcast today based on the respective Premier League positions of the teams that they support. So we'll go from the bottom up. So welcome to contributing editor and Arsenal supporter Kingsley Singleton. Hi, Kingsley.
That's not laughing noises. I'm really sobbing. But also, I would just posit. See, I could start supporting Nottingham Forest, who are much closer to me geographically now. But where are they in the league, Rog?
Well, they're not in the Premier League. It's they're in the best league in the world, the Championship.
The big league.
So welcome aboard, Kingsley. Lovely to have you along. And moving higher up the table, Mr. Photography, and of course, a very smug Spurs supporter, Will Chung. Hi, Will.
Hi, Rog. Hi, Kingsley. And can I just say, Rog, we're not higher up the league. We're on top of the league at the moment. And I recognise it might not last long, but I'm going to enjoy it while I can. And what a great victory it was the other day against the Arsenal.
Well, it's lovely to have you along, and we'll move on quickly because otherwise Kingsley will just take his headphones off and walk away if we keep on labouring this point. So the last podcast we did, we set ourselves a little challenge. We were talking about low light and nighttime photography. And so what we decided to do was try and go out and shoot a star trail or a trail of some sort. Now, I think as we predicted on the podcast, we said that there was going to then be 2 weeks of blanket cloud, which it seems that we pretty much got. So Kingsley, did you manage to get out and get anything?
I did get. Well, I went out and got a traffic trail or two, but I didn't get any star trails. And I'm putting this down to this star tracker that I bought some time ago, which I think it's probably done now. It's done thousands of miles with me across up and down the country, and it's like there's a sort of a smog following me about. So I'm wondering if I can tell everyone who actually wants clear skies to go to one end of the UK and me to the other, maybe they'll kind of get some luck. But actually, I mean, that's besides the point, isn't it? Because a star tracker is actually completely the opposite thing that you might need for a star trail, because it suppresses movement rather than increasing it. But no, I didn't get a star trail. No. So
tell us a little bit about the traffic trail you shot.
The traffic trails were just in my local town, and I was sort of following some of the stuff I spoke about last time about how people might use traffic trails within their sort of compositions. And for me it's about kind of trying to use them as lead-in lines most of the time, and also trying to pick spots where you might get nice kind of unbroken traffic trails, so that you don't have to worry too much about kind of junctions and traffic lights and people turning left or right and stuff, which I sort of at one point completely ignored my own advice and ended up sort of standing there thinking, the cars keep stopping.
And what sort of time had you gone out to do these? So I think this is something we discussed, but time, there's a little bit of detail in the sky of the shots that you took.
Well, I did, I did stick to my suggestions from that point of view, because I got there kind of a good 10 or 15 minutes before I knew that there was going to be kind of enough gloom to do the kind of the long exposures. But that gave me enough time to actually kind of move. I kind of knew roughly where I wanted to be, and it just gave me enough time to kind of walk up and down the street, getting in people's way, and kind of generally trying to work out a composition that I liked, so that I could then, repeat it and kind of finesse it to the point where I kind of got the trails as I wanted them.
Well, I did actually manage to get a star trail. There was one evening locally where it did actually, the cloud did clear probably around about 9 o'clock that evening. So I quickly dashed out, set the camera up on the tripod. I actually had an XS10, Fujifilm XS10, so that's got an intervalometer function on it. So I did a couple of quick sort of basic exposures just to make sure I was getting the exposure right. Obviously positioned in the sky based on the position of Polaris, the North Star, which, if you know your star constellations in the sky, you can find it quite easily by following right-hand bucket of the plough. So you've got the plough sort of constellation. If you just follow the line of the right-hand side of the bucket upwards, you'll find Polaris. So I sort of framed up and then went inside and watched a bit of football as it happened, and I thought it was going to be all right, and I got about 100 or so shots before the battery on the camera kind of packed up, and that was the first thing, was that I hadn't got, because it was all a bit hasty, I hadn't got the battery fully charged. So I actually only got 100 shots, which probably wasn't really enough. But the other kind of error in my haste that I'd made is that I hadn't turned noise reduction off on the camera. And so consequently, what happened was there was a 20-second exposure and then another 20-second black screen. So the resulting star trail that I produced looks like a line of Morse code in the sky.
You just have to kind of accept that that's how you wanted to do it. That's, you know, your own personal spin that you put on it.
So that was kind of quite frustrating. I will post that picture up. I did actually, I tried to overcome it by putting it into Photoshop and adding a bit of blur, but it didn't really solve the problem.
So before Will comes in, and I'm sure kind of gives us a nice dollop of Star Trail education, one of the things I was going to add to it was that actually, even though I couldn't go out and do it, I spent quite a lot of time sort of thinking about it and planning it and doing stuff like turning the long exposure noise reduction function off and making sure that I had batteries and things, and also trying to work out like exactly where I would do it and what lens I was going to use. And my plan was that I was going to use my 300mm lens and point it at probably a position in the sky quite a long way opposite to Polaris, where you get more spin in the stars, and that was going to mean that I had to spend less time out there sort of doing it. So yeah, I gave it a lot of thought, didn't actually get anything.
So you didn't want to spend as much time out there, so underlining your inherent laziness when it comes to picture taking. So come on, Will, what about you? Did you manage to get anything, or did you draw a blank?
No, to be fair, fellas, I drew a blank. You're not going to get any nuggets of Star Trail photography from me today. But there were two things that put me off anyway. One, when we decided it, when we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, we didn't think about moon position. And for me, as soon as I started seeing the moon's actually quite high in the sky, and I'm in favour of wide angle Star Trails as opposed to Kingsley using a 300mm lens. So I wanted to aim my lens at Polaris and get all the stars circling around it, or apparently circling around it. So with the moon high in the sky, that kind of preempted my issue anyway. But also the other thing was we've had really bad conditions here, very cloudy, very foggy for the past 2 weeks. And the only night when it got really clear was around midnight. And I thought, I'm not walking up the local hill at midnight doing Star Trails, thank you very much. I couldn't disappear. I couldn't leave the camera up there and come back down and watch the footy, Roger, like you. So I gave up, to be fair. But I will try it because I have done it before with some success. This is rather fun. Kingsley's right. You do need to get everything sorted so you know what you're doing. And a key example for me was I had a remote control, which was a third-party one. I plugged it into my camera, and you could set any number of exposures up to 999, I think. And I set 300. But it was playing silly buggers. It had a different way of working from what I'm used to. So the way it worked was that basically I didn't get 300 exposures, but I set 300. I got something like half that number with the way the remote control worked. So getting familiar with your kit before you go out is definitely a very good idea.
That's exactly what I was going to jump in and say. That even things about like practicing with your camera in a sort of a darkened room and making sure that you kind of know where all the relevant buttons and stuff are, so that, you know, apart from anything else, so that you don't have to switch a big bright light on and kill your night vision when you're out there. It's all good stuff that you can do in preparation. And
also, Roger, in terms of Polaris, I mean, you mentioned how to find it, but there are loads of free apps you can get out there which can help you identify constellations and where the planets are and everything else. And if you look up, if you see the moon tonight, if you look up high, you see Mars is quite close to the moon as well, if you haven't seen Mars before.
So are we saying then we're gonna give this another try? Because I'm the only person who managed to get a Star Trail, and it it didn't come up very well. Kingsley didn't bother, and you didn't have much luck, Will. So are we saying that over the next couple of weeks we might have more success?
I think definitely worth trying.
Yeah, I keep at it.
I mean, my partner is in she lives quite close to Heathrow, and the light pollution there is horrendous. I mean, if you get out somewhere in the woolly wilds, I mean, Roger, I know you are out somewhere in the woolly wilds, and you stand a chance, I think it's definitely worth doing. And if you get a nice foreground as well, if you get a lit church in the foreground, and because if you stack these star trails, you know, the foreground doesn't burn out.
Yeah.
And you get some really nice shots if you get some nice foreground.
Absolutely.
It's difficult. It's not the easiest form of photography I've ever done.
No, that's true. And the software, while you mentioned software there, the software that I use just to stack my images together, I think we've talked about before, is something called Star Stacks, which is really, really simple to use. And you just sort of drag all your JPEGs, drop them into the window on the software, and it just does the rest for you. It's quite nice watching it slowly form. It's a bit like good old days of black and white and watching prints develop. It's quite fun. Well, we'll give that another go. So what have you been up to then, Will? Have you been doing anything, or has it been in a photography free couple of weeks?
It's been quite photography light, shall we say. I have done some photography at home. I did take the Fujifilm XS10 for a walk around Cambridge. I went in there during lockdown for ostensibly to do some food shopping, and took the camera with me on a sunny day. So I enjoyed using that, which is the test is in the next issue of Photography News. I'm really impressed by that little camera. Actually, it's really good value, great results. Really loved using it actually. So I haven't done much photography, Roger, apart from testing of kit.
So I've just spent the last day looking out of my window, looking over a very, very misty, foggy, dreary landscape. And so what I thought we could do is actually just talk a little bit about the opportunities that bad weather gives you as a photographer, because obviously it's nice when the sun's out and the sky's blue, and or you get some fantastic sunsets or sunrises, but that's not always the case, especially in the good old UK. And certainly over the last 2 or 3 days, we've experienced some really grim, boring weather. So we thought what we'd do is just talk through some various different ideas and techniques that you can try to go out and make a little bit more of the bad weather. So why don't we start with fog, chaps? And Kingsley, when we had a little chat on email earlier, you were advocating going out into the fog and shooting. So what were you going to do? What was your MO going to be?
Embrace the fog. That should be the Singleton family motto. It's funny actually. You describing that kind of bleak view out of the window. That's what Lincolnshire looks like most of the time, actually, Rod. I just joking. I love your Lincolnshire. Beautiful flatness. Fog. It's great, isn't it? Fog is brilliant for photography. Well, fog and mist. And how you use it. There's a huge amount of ways that you can use it. I mean, and it's one of those things that like in films, quite often filmmakers, directors of photography will pump smoke into scenes, even scenes that wouldn't typically have like any kind of natural smoke in them and stuff. And the reason is because it gives you layers, it gives scenes depth. And it's exactly the same when you go out around your own town and you see the whole place in like a different light, and you see these kind of recessions, and it's a wonderful thing to take advantage of. And the main bit of advice that I'd have on it is simply to get out and do it. Unlike star trails, obviously, the best advice is to hang around and think about your focal length and stuff. The mist and fog can be fleeting, and granted, in the winter it hangs around a bit longer than it does in the other months. But yeah, I mean, if you spend too long thinking about it, you probably won't catch it, because it'll be burning off. And like burning, when the mist burns off, sometimes that can give you great opportunities as well, particularly if you're slightly higher up and you can get kind of low-lying kind of mist and fog and stuff. But yeah, and there's loads. Like I said, local towns are great for it. I quite often head into woods when there's a bit of fog and mist around, because again, that's one of those environments that really kind of. It's actually incredibly helpful in a wood. If you want to go and photograph in woodland, misty and foggy conditions are kind of one of the best times to do it.
So I see you nodding along there, Will. Are you in agreement with that?
Yeah, broadly. I mean, just to think about bad weather, Roger, is the last few days here, the bad weather has just been bad weather, but there's nothing to it. It's just clagginess. It's just greyness. And I think for me anyway, at least, is taking pictures in bad weather. I want it to be doing something. So, if it's raining, great. If there's a strong wind, we're moving the clouds about, wonderful. But when there's just nothing there, it's a real challenge to get motivated. But I agree with Kingsley, about the fog. I mean, it is a wonderful thing. I do find it works very well in the urban areas as well as in the woods. I mean, the urban, especially if you get the mix of car rear lights and indicators going, that can be really atmospheric. I'm actually quite fond of making my fog shots black and white. The thing about fog, I think, is just make sure you get the exposure right. Just overexposed slightly, so you retain the airiness of the gentle mist and fog. And also in terms of timing, again, I hate to say it, Kingsley's right again. You know, that getting out early, watching it burn off, photographing as it changes, shoot quickly. I mean, you know, you do need to shoot quickly because it does change very, very quickly. So, you know, be up to speed with your lens changing. Make sure the lens front is clear of any condensation, and just enjoy it. When the conditions are right, it's like creation. It's wonderful. And it's interesting about snow. Sorry, before you dive in there, Roger, thinking about snow, I heard on the radio this morning with global warming, is that we're probably not going to see snow in this by the end of this century, apart from the very highest mountains in Scotland and Wales. So that's global warming for you. I know it won't affect us by the end of this century, of course, but
we'll be underwater in Lincolnshire anyway.
Well, that's also true. So we don't see much snow, basically.
It's interesting what you say there, though, Will, about that, because sometimes fog and mist actually is just grey and dull and dreary and not seemingly not particularly photogenic. But I remember having a conversation with a photographer some time ago about the fact that he shot a lot in black and white. And I said, you know, what do you do on days? Because I think the day I was talking to him, it was a day pretty much like today. So it was really misty, really overcast, really kind of grey and dull. I said, how do you go about getting good images on a day like today? And he's just said, look for contrast. So it was all about, it wasn't so much, you know, the layering thing that obviously you guys have both talked about, absolutely, you know, relevant. But then in where I am at the moment, it's a proper like pea super. You really can't see, there's not a whole lot of layers going on. So then it is about this sort of thing about looking for, you know, strong blacks and greys and looking for contrast.
I think situations like that as well, it's good. It's a good idea to have a kind of a mental list about places where you can go local to you that fit in with certain types of weather. So if we're talking about mist, I know I've already said woodland, but like I know I've got pegged 3 or 4 particularly good lone trees around near where I live, and you know, love a lone tree in the middle of the mist. And if you want a bit of contrast, you know, just if you can get someone to walk into your shot in some brightly coloured clothing or something like that, you know, like that thing from the end of Don't Look Now, wandering around in Venice. Have you seen that when you've been in Venice, Will?
Yeah. The kid in the red coat, isn't it?
Yeah. You've mentioned there, Will, about snow, that it's not going to be around for very long, but hopefully, you know, we'll get some in the next, I mean, actually, we had some snow here this week, in fact, albeit quite fleeting. But when it comes to photographing snow and frost, again, it's like an exposure issue, isn't it? First and foremost, would you say, Will?
Well, snow, if it's snow on the ground, and let's say the sun comes out, you have to make sure you're overexposed slightly, maybe by a stop or even 2 stops. I mean, with digital, of course, you can perk it up in raw processing afterwards, but with snow, to keep it light and white, you need to overexpose a little bit because the brightness does 4 camera meters into making it look a bit grey. For me, though, the fun with snow is when it's actually snowing. So if the wind's blowing it down, there's a nice, you've got nice big snowdrops, I'm out there with the camera as soon as I can and start playing with slow shutter speeds around 15th of a second or 30th, depending on, you know, your lens, your hand-holding skills and the way the snow is moving around. But you get some lovely streaky effects with snow falling. And that's the sort of thing I would like to do. And again, then you go for the person with the brolly trying to fend off snow as they're walking through towards you, things like that.
I'm a little less inclined to rush out into actual snowstorms than Will. I mean, it's not something I've ever actually tried that often. Although I think, like, if I was trying to do it and it was really heavy, I don't know whether I'd try and kind of freeze the flakes a bit and then maybe try and layer up the images a bit to kind of make them clearer. I don't know. But I mean, one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about snow for me was one of the things that I've realised, particularly when shooting in towns, if you're trying to get really nice snowy images, is to kind of watch your footsteps a little bit, because quite often you can kind of yomp about and try to look for a good angle, turn around, find one, and then realise that you've just walked all the way through it. And sometimes find like a kind of a trail of footprints might work really well, but a lot of the time it just kind of looks messy. So another aspect of that is you know, if you're going to go out and kind of grab a fresh snowfall, is again to try and do it early before it gets too rucked up and messy.
Just thinking about the bad weather thing, Kingsley, the use of shutter speeds. I mean, going back a few years, and I don't know if you've seen it, but Martin Parr did a project called Bad Weather, and he was using his flash gun to freeze raindrops and snowdrops. So there was that mix of flash and picking up the stuff nearby, and also some mood thrown in as well. So I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can have a go at this.
So you're, Kingsley, more of an advocate of going into a town rather than heading out into the woolly wilds, as Will calls it, when there's a layer of snow.
I think snow's one of those things that kind of gives you a different aspect, a different view of well-known kind of locations, and that's kind of the way that I normally kind of embrace it. I mean, and also it's nice to have focal points within snowy scenes, I think, which you can quite easily have out in the wilderness. Again, if you can find a sort of a decent tree or the line of a stone wall, or you can kind of get like, I don't know, a sunrise or a sunset as your focal point, then it's great. Yeah, but I guess it's just me being lazy again, isn't it? All I want to do is roll out of bed, take a couple of pictures, get a coffee on the way back.
I thought it might be down to your ownership of heavy rear-wheel drive German saloons, which might prevent you from getting out into the country.
Maybe, yeah, they are. It's poison for BMWs, isn't it? Yeah. Didn't you once have an interesting encounter with a snowdrift, Rog, out in the wilds?
I did, yes, some time ago. Yeah, I was actually in Derbyshire. That's right, many years ago, walking just after Christmas with a friend of mine, and we were sort of cameras out, taking pictures, beautiful scenery in front of us, and I just thought, oh, there's a really nice picture just over there, and sort of walked off the path towards it, only to find myself virtually entirely submerged in snow. So so there is. I mean, I'm not exactly Mr. Danger like yourself, Kingsley, when it comes to landscape photography, but that's certainly about as risque as I've got in my time. I mean, talking about risk, and I know it's not really the time of year for it at the moment, but thunder, like lightning, more specifically, not thunder, but lightning is something that I know when I was sort of first taking pictures, I really wanted to try and get some lightning caught on film back in the day. But obviously, it's not really the time of year for it. It's much more of a summer thing, as you so rightly pointed out when we were chatting about this earlier, Will. But have either of you guys ever tried to sort of capture lightning in action, and how do you go about it?
I personally haven't tried it. I mean, you need a good fork lightning storm rather than a sheet lightning storm, I believe. But I haven't tried it myself.
No, I've never managed it. I've never gone. I've seen lightning when I've been out. And with my track record, I've just normally sort of run for cover, but I've never actually gone out deliberately to shoot it. I'm sort of imagining some level of, trying to combine it with like a coastal landscape or something. That would be great, with a bit of lightning out to sea or something. But I guess I kind of think unless you got very lucky, it would be one of those images that you would probably have to construct to a certain extent from multiple frames. Although, I mean, I'm sure obviously people shoot them all as one, but for me, I'd probably kind of try and work out where it was roughly likely to be, get a good foreground, take a nice picture, and then try and get another exposure which I could then sort of blend in somehow.
And that's just a question of like locking the shutter open and for a certain amount of time, and then hoping that you're going to get a bolt of lightning in that time, I take it, rather than sort of trying to. We obviously can't time it, can you?
No, there's a lot of luck involved in this, Roger. I mean, you're right. You probably do have to open the shutter, and for a few seconds, it's a bit like shooting fireworks. But I do remember. I mean, I don't recall if you saw it, but there's a sports picture, and it was Usain Bolt finishing the 100 meters, and as he finished it, there was a bolt of lightning in the shot.
Amazing.
And I can't remember what games it was. It was after one of the major championships. But obviously, it was pure luck. But he got a lightning bolt and a bolt of lightning in the same frame. But stunning image, absolutely awesome. But I mean, obviously, it is a bit of luck. And I mean, if I was down at the coast and there was a lightning storm in front of me, I would head towards undercover, but still getting a view of the scene, and get the tripod up, set the shutter open, and probably take 1 or 2 steps back, just in case my carbon fiber tripod became a very good lightning conductor. Yeah. I think if I was undercover, I should be okay, I would think.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't want to do any open near any tree or anything like that.
Definitely safety first if you are out in lightning for certain. But another thing that's perhaps a little bit more achievable, more easy to work with is high winds. Something else that we tend to get quite a lot of this time of year in the UK. So I mean, what sort of creative photographic images can you get in high winds, Will? What would you do if you were? Would you head to the coast? Would you stay inland? What would you do?
Well, I mean, the coast is one place. Obviously, trees another good option where you can get a bit of blur, perhaps. But I'd be happy in town too, because if I was getting strong winds and providing I'll get some cloud movement in there as well, I'll very happily put on an extreme exposure filter, like a 10-stop ND or even more if I needed to, and find a spot where I could set the camera up without it being blown around too much, or maybe shelter it with my own body just so the camera wasn't buffeted, and try some 2-minute, 4-minute exposures of clouds whipping around the sky. And it's just, again, for me, I need some bold foreground. So, a good building, a bridge, pier, tree, whatever it might be. But just experiment with that sort of thing. There is an opportunity with and at this time of year also, with those long exposure filters and the contrast being fairly low, even when the clouds move through the sky, you get some lovely effects. I mean, the mood you can get is just wonderful.
Kingsley, anything to add?
Coastal wise, big winds, windy conditions sort of mean big seas, don't they? And so, like, that's a concern for a number of reasons. One of which is getting hit by a wave, which we've probably all managed at some point or other. But then what you notice is that particularly if you're sort of slightly higher up and you're looking at the shore, then you get a lot of froth. And so it can be good because you get a different aspect, a different look to images in that kind of weather, even if you're sort of shooting long exposures. And then, of course, the opposite end of the scale is to try and think about how you might kind of capture the waves in a bit more of a sharp manner. And obviously there are all those. It seems to be more and more popular these days, doesn't it? Whenever high winds are predicted, you get a lot of people down places like, is it Dorset? Where you get these kind of enormous waves breaking across the harbours.
Yeah, the popular one at the moment, I think, is New Haven. Because there's a seawall there, and there's a lighthouse, I think, there as well.
Yeah.
And I gather during storms there are loads of photographers down there. I mean, literally loads of photographers out there.
Yeah,
it's almost careful.
It's almost sort of oversubscribed, but I mean, the pictures look great and a lot of people are shooting them again on sort of long lenses, aren't they? So you get that kind of compression between the wave and a lighthouse, and you can kind of show the size of the things. But I'd echo broadly what Will said. Like, if you want to take advantage of high wind in an exposure, then look for things that move. So whether it's water or clouds or trees, look for those things and try and again, kind of keeping a list of things local to you that you can nip out and kind of aim your camera at is quite a good idea in those circumstances.
And you mentioned there, Will, about using an ND filter to obviously extend your exposure time. Would it be safe to say that there are a range of different sort of prices that you can pay for these extreme ND filters, and the cheaper ones are not necessarily a good option because you can get some pretty hefty color shifts, or are they all kind of much of a muchness?
Oh, that's a slightly controversial topic, really, Roger, because I think there are some which are less good than others, particularly. I mean, there was a time where there were some made from resin, and they let through infrared that can give all sorts of light pollution within the scene, and they could look horrible if you're using color shots. I mean, if you were converting to black and white, that would be less of an issue. But it's like in many things in life and in photography, that the more you spend, you do get better performance, maybe better coatings, more neutral performance, that sort of thing. So if you can spend a bit more money, yeah, it makes sense to go that way. And I also know there's a popularity at the moment with these variable NDs, where you can vary the amount of neutral density you get by rotating the front. And some of those can work really well, providing you're not getting this strange X pattern when it's basically two polarizers used together. And when you go too far, you get an X pattern. So as long as you don't go there, that's fine. But do it. Yeah, I would say if you get into it, buy a decent one. It's my best advice for that.
I'd totally agree with Will in that, and the more you spend, the more optical purity you're likely to get. And the only thing I'd add to that is that it's a bit like you can, if you spend very little, then you will probably get a filter that isn't great. If you hit the mid market, then you'll start getting really good results. And then if you want to spend more, you'll probably have to spend quite a lot more, but you will achieve the most optically pure results. And that's from someone who, when I started doing long exposures, I started using welder's glass. I couldn't afford a long exposure filter, which gives everything a beautiful green look.
But obviously, if you're shooting in black and white, presumably then it's less critical in terms of what you're spending.
But I mean, you still got to look for things like flare, for instance, is an issue, especially internal flare. I mean, sometimes with these, I mean, it's a complex topic, extreme long exposure filters. But some holders and some filters, they can leak light, and leak light can actually be a problem, with flare on the image at the end. So you have to be careful with things like that as well. So some of the cheaper ones can leak light in that respect. And just flare generally, and foggy pictures that need a lot of boosting in software for a better contrast, just painful.
So Kingsley, you've obviously moved on from welder's glass. So what type of filter? Names. What's your ND filter of choice?
What do I use? I've got a couple of B&W long exposure filters. I've got a couple of Hoyer ones, kind of different strengths. I think I like a lot of those kind of. I mean, do you know what? If you're picking a recognized name, and I know this sounds like a kind of a get out, but if you pick a recognized name, it's actually pretty hard to get a bad filter.
Okay.
I think it's when you're buying something that costs like $3.99 off Amazon. It's a 105mm filter for $3.99. And the other thing is, like, I mean, if you spend very little, you'll notice that the handling isn't so good as well, because the better the filter, the more likely it is to have coatings that make it easier to clean, the more likely it is to be perfectly round so that you can screw it on and off the lens or slide it in and out of the holder more easily. Very, very cheap and disposable filters, you can quite easily get them locked on the end of your lens, or it's sort of a bit of a false economy, really.
Absolutely. What about you, Will? What's your go-to filter when it comes to NDs?
I have a couple of sets I use. I have a little, big, and super stopper from Lee Filters, and I also have a couple of NDs from Case, which is part of their magnetic circular system, which I quite like. So I've invested and bought into that. So Case and Lee for me at the moment.
Good stuff. Well, hopefully that's given you some useful advice to get out and shoot in the not such good weather that we tend to have at this time of the year. Obviously, as kind of we've alluded to there, it's really important that you put safety first. We don't want any scenarios like Kingsley on our hands, who falls down things and breaks bones and what have you. So do look after yourselves if you go out. But hopefully you'll be able to use our advice there to get out and shoot a little bit more, even when the weather's not quite so good. Got a couple of reader questions which have been sent in to podcast@photographynews.co.uk. As we always say, we love to get questions from you. We love to get some more questions from you. So do feel free to send your questions in. No question is too large or too small, as they may say. So let's start with a chap called Raul Pinto, who asked a very simple question, which I think is going to have quite a lengthy answer to. And he asks, why do people choose to shoot black and white over color? Now I'm sure there are books written about this, Raul. So we will try and cover this off in the next 2 or 3 minutes. But Kingsley, why don't you go first? Why don't you have a stab at trying to explain why people shoot black and white over color?
I mean, it's purely a stylistic thing, isn't it, these days? I mean, it is literally a choice of photography now, rather than a burden. Something which started as a something that people did because they literally couldn't shoot color, now is a technique choice, really, that we can enjoy, and we can choose to shoot raw, and then we can choose to process things in color or black and white kind of after the event. One of the things that has often stuck with me about black and white is that people call black and white more truthful, and I think there's an argument to be made for that in documentary photography and stuff, but equally it's a contradiction, isn't it? Because it's the least lifelike and true way that you can shoot, because it's not real, is it? We don't see in black and white. So it's a funny sort of contradiction, that, I think. But I mean, ultimately, I would say try to align your choice of black and white or color to the subject and the effect that you want to create with the image.
What about you, Will? You're a big advocate of black and white shooting. So do you, what makes you choose when to shoot black and white and when you shoot color?
Well, the thing is, Roger, in the film days when I took up photography, you had to make the choice really quite simply right at the beginning, because that's what you ended up buying and putting into your camera. You only shot either black and white or color, unless you were one of these lucky photographers to have two cameras and all that sort of stuff. But digitally, of course, you can just shoot raw now and then decide afterwards, as Kingsley says. And if you're not quite certain of what you're doing, then with the cameras we have nowadays, what you can do is just set it so you shoot black and white, but still have the raw file. And if you want at the same time of the same scene, change the color settings around and shoot a color shot as well, and compare the two JPEGs, in camera, and then decide when you get back home which you prefer. But for me, if Rule asked me that question now, and I was sitting next to him, I would say, look at the masters and what they have done in black and white photography. And by those sort of people, I'm talking about Henri Cartier-Bresson, Bill Brandt, Irving Penn. So I made a quick list of them. Brassai, Ansel Adams. Now, I know when Adams was asked, would he shot color if it had been available to him, he did say yes. But look at the work he's got. Look at the work those people have got and what they've produced. And would those images work in color? I suppose are the thing you should ask yourself. And just analyze it. Just be inspired by what they do. And if you go, actually, no, it's not for me, I prefer color, fine, no problem with that. Or just shoot raw and play with them afterwards on your computer. Use, I obviously don't know what software the chap uses, but get a good plugin. I mean, I prefer using the Nick collection, which has just been updated. The Silvery FX plugin is really very, very good, and you get some nice black and white conversions, and then see what you think. And just do some A's and B's and just look at them, shoot in different situations with those, and do comparisons that way, and see what you prefer. There's no right or wrong.
Basically. And if you look at the work of those people that you've just listed there, Will, I think there's a few well-known names in there that you've gone through. I mean, people like, for example, Bill Brandt. They were very much sort of form, weren't they? They were sort of form photographers, i.e., it was very much a focus around the form and the light and what have you. And is black and white something that you tend to when you're trying to convey form and texture and that type of thing? Is that more of a black and white sort of approach that works well?
Yeah, form texture. I mean, you mentioned the word earlier. Contrast is another good one. I mean, I'm a contrasty photographer in that when I shoot my black and white, my skies tend to be quite dark. Yeah, unnaturally dark, you could argue, but I like that grittiness and that contrast and that mood you can get in black and white. That personally, I struggle with color, and there are color photographers who think exactly the other way around as well. And there are color masters and there are mono masters. It depends how you want to see.
I had a chance to think a bit more about it while Will was going on there. But what's that? 20 minutes. Naming people.
That's rich coming from you.
Yeah, we'll have edited it down. Don't worry.
It kind of made me think. Like, I can't remember the last time I edited a picture in black and white. Or rather, I was struggling to, and then I realised I think it was a long exposure. I think I did like a series of long exposures in daylight, a bit like Will was talking about with long exposure filters, and there was something about the simplicity of the images that meant that black and white worked better because, and also I think because I was working like it was a series of pictures, and I wanted them all to look pretty similar. So again. Black and white being a good way of kind of tying things together.
I think also what we've been talking about earlier with bad weather, for example, when we kept on going on about, the monochrome look at some of the scenes you get. So why don't you convert them to monochrome and all these pictures you see of, big seas breaking over sea walls, they're stunning in black and white, but they haven't got half the impact in color, from what I've seen. I mean, just try some of these things, Rule, and see what you think.
I think like particular styles of portrait also work a lot better in black and white, don't they? If you're going for a particularly striking effect. I mean, I'm not like I don't really shoot portraits that regularly, but Will and you, Rog, might have an opinion about. I'm thinking about your sort of Jane Bone kind of things with these very kind of characterful pictures.
Yeah, it's quite interesting because actually, when it comes to portraits, I mean, I'm a sort of particularly regular portrait photographer, but black and white tends to work better if you're trying to convey like emotion rather than just a likeness of somebody. So if maybe stuff like the Jane Bone type stuff, is maybe it's more about she was trying to convey an emotion in those photographers, or they may have had their head in their hands, or or laughing or whatever, and maybe that type of approach in black and white comes across better because you're stripping away all the color and just really focusing in on the emotion that your portrait, or at a wedding, obviously emotions tend to run quite high, which is why wedding photographers tend to tread the black and white route quite regularly. So well, I mean, there's all sorts of stuff going on there, Raoul. I mean, we could probably keep on doing, we could probably do an entire podcast, if not write a whole magazine about what to choose, but hopefully that's given you a few pointers. I think really it comes down to sort of personal preference, but also there are some things to consider there in terms of what you're actually photographing. So let's move on to the next question, which comes from a chap called Adam Neal in Chelmsford. And he said, I'm going to spend some of my time over Christmas backing up my images. How would the team recommend I do this? Now, we had a little chat about this prior to recording the podcast, and it became very clear that Will is the, perhaps understandably so, Will is perhaps the most particular about image backup. So why don't we start with you, Will? What's your setup, and what would you recommend to Adam?
Yeah, just oddly enough, Roger, in the latest issue of Photography News, I do talk about this in my editorial column, because I think I do need treatment about my paranoia about losing images, because we're not talking great works of art here. They're just my images. And I suppose that's the thing about it. I spend a lot of time and effort producing these images, whether they're any good or not, it's not relevant. So that's why I like to back them up. So I do have what they call a 5-bay RAID, which is 5 hard drives in 1 unit. And so I've got 4 terabytes times 5 disks, which means I've got 12 terabytes of RAID effectively. And basically with that is, if you've got 5 drives in there, if one of them goes down, you don't lose any data because the other 4 cover it off. And you get to a certain point, I think even some of the best RAIDs, all that information can just be down onto 1 disk, and if you lose 4, you've still got the information there. So I have a RAID, which bizarrely enough, in my column, did go down on me the other week, and I had to take everything off so I could access it, but I couldn't adjust any files on the RAID. So I had to download all the images, all the files onto another couple of drives, reformat the RAID, and then put them all back onto the RAID. So this is a process, and we're talking terabytes of information here. This is a process of days, and I was leaving the computer on overnight. And I had, 1 terabyte of images, took 8 hours or 9 hours. So I literally set the thing running, put the screensaver on so it wouldn't ruin my screens, and then went to bed. So the RAID's a good idea. I mean, I did recently buy, thanks to Black Friday, I bought another 8 terabyte drive to help now. So basically now my backup is this RAID, which I work from, and a couple of 8 terabyte drives, one of which I'll keep off site. So if anything disastrous does happen, I haven't lost everything.
Now that doesn't sound cheap, Will.
Well,
that setup.
Well, bizarrely enough, I mean, to be fair, the 8 terabyte drives on Black Friday were £110,
right?
Which I thought was fairly reasonable. I'm not saying that's a cheap solution, but for the security and peace of mind, buying a couple of those is not too bad for me. I mean, the RAID itself, I haven't bought the most expensive RAID around, but it can be very expensive. But it probably cost me, with 5 drives, it probably costs about £400, £450, which again, I know is a significant amount of money. But then, personally, I spent a lot of money gathering my pictures, and that as an insurance policy is worth it for me. But everybody has to make their own decisions. And, if you want a cheap way of backing up, as Adam may want, just buy yourself a couple of 8 terabyte drives, about, depending on the deal, you get about £110 each. Use one as your backup in your house, maybe have one then backed up at friends or an in-laws or somewhere else off-site. There's different ways to go. I mean, you could consider the cloud solution as well, but with the amount of pictures I've got and all the hassle at the moment with the internet speed I've got, I prefer to use a hard drive as opposed to using clouds.
So what about you, Kingsley? I said I'm gonna guess here that you're not a RAID man, or are you?
I've been trying to spend the last 3 or 4 minutes trying to remember what RAID stands for. Really annoying. No, hang on. No, it's what is it? Random array
of something, independent something or other.
Discs, isn't it? That's it. Yeah.
So you haven't got one of those?
I haven't got. No, I have. Do you know? I have got one somewhere, but I don't use it. It was it's an old thing. Anyway, what I do is actually exactly what Will described at the back end of his monologue there, which is to buy 2 fairly large regular hard drives and just do a mirror backup. Kind of once every 4 to 6 months, I kind of update it and then I swap them over. And one of them I give to a friend of mine to keep under his stairs or in his loft or somewhere. And so if my house burns down, or when it burns down, you've got a certain amount of protection. Not that I may not be thinking about pictures when I'm fleeing from the house. I don't know. But that's a kind of that's a fairly sort of DIY kind of solution.
Absolutely. So in between you going to your mate and picking up the one that you've left under his stairs, you're backing up to one drive every time, and then you go and get the drive from your mate and back up to that and then give it him back.
I have there's a sort of a halfway house thing that I do, which is I keep a separate folder which is like which is the pics that I've shot and saved since the last backup. So there's still a and they're backed up, but they're not backed up across the 2 main drives. So there is some redundancy to it, but
but also presumably that leaves you at the if that during an interim period, if that disk breaks on you, then you're stuck because you've lost them, right?
You would lose the most recent pictures. Yeah, and that's why anything that I shoot commercially or that's really important to me, I will then probably back up to another drive just for a bit of extra security. Okay. And I think what happens is like the longer you've kind of been practicing digital photography, you're going to have built up quite a collection of drives because you outlive them every few years, don't you? So having a few of them around that you can lob the odd kind of gig or or even 500 gigs of stuff just for your own security kind of isn't such a bad thing. The other thing I was going to mention was about the idea about deleting, and we've kind of written lots of articles about how healthy and important it is to go through and kind of try and delete the stuff that you don't want and kind of streamline the amount of storage. But I came to a realization recently of the fact that these 8 terabyte drives were, as I said, just over £100, and it's like the amount of time it would take me to go through and delete a load of stuff versus the cost of. And the next time when I go and buy a 12 terabyte drive in 2 years' time, it'll probably still be just over £100 because the cost of storage will come down. So it's almost like the deleting is almost a false economy, I think, in some ways.
So I'm from my perspective, I don't do anything on local storage. I put all my stuff up in the cloud. I've got a Google account which costs me £15 a month. That has unlimited storage. So rather than faffing about with drives that can break, etc., luckily, from my perspective, I live somewhere where I've got a really quick broadband speed. So I've got ridiculously fast. Everything that I shoot just goes up onto my Google Drive. And the other thing I was saying, that something that you've kind of alluded to there, Kingsley, is that I think I do a lot of self-editing as well as I'm going through stuff. I've not been so good at it in years gone by, so I've got a load of old stuff. But more recently, I've found myself being a lot more, particular about what I keep and what I chuck away. And so consequently, I think the stuff on my Google Drive is less than a terabyte, just because I just don't hold on to as much stuff anymore. So I mean, various different solutions there for you, Adam. There's the expensive option that Will takes. You've got the halfway house option that Kingsley does, or you can obviously do the cloud option. depending on what your internet connection is like. But hopefully that has answered your question. Obviously, do get in touch with us at podcast@photographynews.co.uk if you've got any questions that you would like to ask. And if you would like to go onto our website, which is www.photographynews.co.uk, then do go on there. You can read all of the old issues. The latest issue, the double issue, is up there now, and Will's working away hard to get the next one done, hopefully before Christmas. Obviously, if you want to get in touch with us through social media, you can do so on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, all using the same handle. We're at PhotoNewsPN. So I think we're just about done, but obviously we wouldn't finish a podcast without a Will's word of wisdom. So Will, what do you reckon this time round?
Well, two things from me, Rog, before we sign off. One is, if you're listening to this before the 25th of January 2021, please register your votes for the Photography News Awards, which is running on our website currently. This is where we nominate gear in a whole range of areas, of imaging areas. So it can be monitor, best DSLR, best mirrorless camera, best wide-angle lens, etc., etc. And what we do is recognise what the industry have done for us by giving them awards for the best, this, that, and the other. So the awards are running at the moment. So if you hear this before the 20th of January 2021, please go to our website and vote for us, please. Big thank you in advance for that. And in terms of a technique tip, Rog, the one thing I would say to photographers everywhere, and I say it often, and you know, I'm blue in the face basically, but crop your pictures. Whatever you do, try cropping your pictures. Now, in softwares like Lightroom, I know Kingsley doesn't make a catalogue, but in softwares like Lightroom, I'm sure you do in others, but you can make a virtual copy. So it doesn't take any more memory, but it's a virtual copy of your file. So what I tend to do now, when I've got a picture I'm working on, I think, oh, it's got something and I just want to fiddle around. I will make several virtual copies. Then I will try cropping in different ways. And the things about it, every picture needs cropping. And I think very few photographers, I mean, there have been a few. In the past, I think Ansel Adams never cropped. I think I've been told that Henri Cartier-Bresson never cropped. But I think most photographers' work would benefit from a slither off here, or a corner cropped off here, or the horizon straightening, wherever it might be. So my tip is, make yourself a virtual copy in the software you've got if you can do it, and just crop your images and see what the difference is between, you know, an upright could maybe do horizontal, you got a square, little bits off here, little bits off there. So just try it. It's so easy now with digital. You know, when we shot color slide film, color transparency film, cropping was a nightmare because you needed bits of silver sticky tape. Now it's so easy. So just improve your photography by cropping your work.
And a top tip it is too. You're full of crops, aren't you, Kingsley? Full of crop.
I'm going to crop off. Yeah.
We're back to Arsenal now.
That's Crocs, not crop. Okay, fantastic. Thanks very much, Will. So that just leaves us to say thank you very much to contributing editor and Arsenal supporter.
Devotee.
Devotee. Come on, Kingsley, up the Gunners. Yes?
Quite right, yeah. Let's just think that trying to remember that the weight of history is on our side.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very much the Nottingham Forest approach, is go back 40 years and remember the glory days. Yeah, absolutely. And in the meantime, enjoy your time on the top, Will, and we'll see you again soon.
Absolutely. Take care. All the best.
Cheers, everyone. Goodbye.